Okay. So my message today really is about fathers and honoring our fathers. And so I'm going to start with, I'm going to ask all of the fathers, grandfathers, if you'll stand up. If you're a father or grandfather or both, stand up. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask all of the ladies and everybody else here to hold your hands out like this, and we're going to give them a blessing. And just repeat it after me. It's, we love you.
We love you.
We bless you.
We bless you.
We honor you.
We honor you.
And we appreciate you.
And we appreciate you.
You are amazing, and we are grateful to have you in our lives.
You are amazing, and we are grateful to have you in our lives.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Okay, sit down, Jack.
Sit down.
You can sit. So I have a little story for you to start off with. It says, when the good Lord was creating fathers, he started with a tall frame. And a female angel nearby said, "What kind of father is that? If you're going to make children so close to the ground, why have you put fathers up so high? He won't be able to shoot marbles without kneeling. He won't be able to tuck a child into bed without bending. And he won't even kiss a child without having to stoop." And God smiled and said, "Yes, but if I make him child-size, who would the children have to look up to?" And when God made a father's hands, they were large and sinewy. And the angel shook her head sadly and said, "Do you know what you're doing? Large hands are clumsy. They can't manage diaper pins and small buttons and rubber bands on ponytails, or even remove splinters caused by baseball bats." God smiled and said, "I know, but they're large enough to hold everything a small boy empties from his pockets at the end of the day, yet small enough to cup a child's face in his hands." Then God molded long, slim legs and broad shoulders. The angel nearly had a heart attack at this. She said, "Boy, this is the end of the week, all right. Do you realize you just made a father without a lap? How's he going to pull a child close to him without the kid falling between his legs?"
Yeah.
God smiled and said, "A mother needs a lap. A father needs strong shoulders to pull a sled, balance a boy on a bicycle, or hold a sleepy head on the way home from the circus." God was in the middle, creating two of the largest feet anyone had ever seen, and the angel could contain herself no longer. "That's not fair," she said. "Those large boats are going to be too clumsy to jump out of bed early in the morning when the baby cries, or walk through a small birthday party without crushing at least 3 of the other guests." And God smiled and said, "They'll work, you'll see. They'll support a small child who wants a piggyback ride, or scare off mice at the summer cabin, or display shoes that will be a challenge for the child to fill." God worked through the night, giving the father only a few words, but they were firm and authoritative words in a firm and authoritative voice. Eyes that could see everything and yet remain calm and tolerant. And finally, almost as an afterthought, God added tears. Then he turned to the angel and said, "Now, are you satisfied that he can love as much as a mother?" And the angel shut up. So I like that little story because we're sort of like that doubting angel, aren't we? We don't fully understand the differences in a father's role and a mother's role. And this little story may describe you or your father, or it may not. But some of us listen to this story and we feel cheated because we don't have the memories of a dad like that. And frankly, many of us are still mad about that. Many of us are still carrying around hurt and resentment, and we can't bring ourselves to let go of the past hurts and disappointments. And many of us even refuse to remember any of the good parts about our fathers. But the making of a father and its many complexities are worth exploring so that we may gain a fuller perspective of the difficulties of being a man. That sweet little story that I just read of how the love of God builds a man, there's another story, and that's how society built a man. For generations, boys and men have been told by society how they should act and how they should feel. You know what I mean by that. Little boys are taught they can't cry. They're taught to fight. They're taught to play rough. They're made fun of and called sissies if they aren't tough and strong. They've learned to stuff their feelings at a very early age. And when this kind of training happens, you're taught to shut down your feelings. The problem is, we can't just shut down some of our feelings. Humans aren't made that way. When we shut down some of our feelings, we can't compartmentalize. We shut down all our feelings. We can't feel the feelings and express them, such as the joy and the tenderness, when we've shut down part of our feelings. The human brain and the nervous system just don't work that way. So if you teach a young boy that they can't cry and they can't feel, and they become numb to the more normal reflex that we call feeling, that feeling shuts down all of it. And since in this society it was never okay for a little boy to cry, those little boys grew up to be men where they never felt free to be who God made them to be and to fully express all the various emotions that men feel. The tenderness described in that little God story, it's there in all of you guys. But for so many men in this society, it's been squelched. Most men have been reluctant, and some even unable to hug and cry and say, I love you, because they grew up with the inability to honor and feel and speak those feelings. Sadly, that got passed on from generation to generation. The man who does not know who he is and who he was created to be is forever trying to prove himself as a man in unhealthy ways, because that is what was taught. Our fathers are the products of a fearful world, flawed teachings of parents, of schooling, of societal misunderstandings, and of not having regard for what is normal for man. And for this reason, men typically live about 6 to 8 years shorter lives than women. You see, depressing our feelings causes depression, and depression causes illness. And furthermore, the inability to feel causes us to hurt others in ways we shouldn't. Because if we don't know how it would feel to another person, because we've shut down our feelings, then we don't know how we're affecting someone else. Inappropriate feelings cause us to do inappropriate things. And I'm bringing this up because we either have been taught that, or maybe we had a father or a grandfather or a stepfather or someone else who was taught that. And so whether you're a guy sitting in the audience today or whether you're a woman, somewhere along the way you've had a father who may have felt distant to you, not known how to talk to you, not known how to say, I love you. And so we believed they didn't, when in truth, they had just been shut down and didn't know how. But all those feelings were still inside of them. There's a story in the Bible, and it's a story of King David. He was the singer and the poet. Remember, he was the one that God felt was the most favorable. And he was what was considered the epitome of a godly ruler. However, some of his children didn't think that was true for him. And they didn't think he was an example. And they didn't think he was a role model. Now remember, back in the days of the Bible, they had a lot of kids. But this is the story of King David and two of his sons. It's in the book of 2 Samuel, and it begins with chapter 12. It tells the story of one of the sons of King David named Absalom. He was a young man of extraordinary promise. His life was ruined because one of his sisters was assaulted by one of his half-brothers, a man named Amnon. Now, when Absalom realized his father, King David, was not going to do anything about that, it made him furious. And so Absalom killed Amnon. When Absalom realized his father would be that angry at what he had done, he fled for his life. Absalom fled for his life, knowing that David would be after him to find him and probably kill him. However, David stood passively by and did nothing about that either. Gradually, Absalom became so filled with rage against his father that he led a full-scale rebellion to overthrow the throne, to seize the kingdom from his father, and all of that resulted, of course, in Absalom's death. So when I read this story in the Bible, I could almost hear the undertones of Absalom saying in various passages in that story, yeah, he's such a godly man, such a man after God's own heart. What a joke. He's a hypocrite. You know, he just felt like his father had not done his duty. We can't fault Absalom for his anger. He had every right to be angry at David for his negligence as a parent, as well as his failures of the king. However, there would have been a happier ending if Absalom had found it in his heart to forgive his father for not taking the action. His hatred, his resentment, and his anger ended up destroying Absalom. His hatred, his resentment, and his anger ended up destroying Absalom and getting him killed and bringing great suffering to the whole kingdom that King David ruled. But Absalom couldn't figure his father for his shortcomings, and his own life was ruined by his inability to forgive. And so we do have some forgiveness work here to do. It's a great message and lesson for many of us to learn. Some of us are still carrying our hurt and our anger and our unforgiveness against our own fathers. And many of us have had good reason, just as Absalom had good reason. But just as Absalom should have forgiven his father and avoided great suffering, we should forgive our fathers for the same reasons that we've talked about here today. That reason, which is learning that our own fathers were raised to ignore their feelings. And it's extremely important to your good health and a happy life to forgive your father Remember that he was human, and remember that he was flawed through no fault of his own, based on society's expectations of him. All of us, you know, are not perfect. We're a great deal short of perfect, every one of us. We're all flawed. We're all only human. Because all of us are the product of a world whose teachings have been flawed. It's easy to think of our Father as choosing to become, you know, if you had the absentee father, or you had the strict, harsh father, or you had the father who was the alcoholic, whatever it might have been, we tend to think our Father chose to do that. And we tend to hold him totally responsible for however he showed up in our lives. We have to remember he was a child once too. He was taught and shaped by his upbringing, by whoever raised him, treated him, was all he knew. So, have to always remember we have something to forgive with the Father that raised us, that he was doing the best that he knew how to do based on the teachings he was given and the role models he had and the faults of the schooling that he received or did not receive, along with other erroneous influences of society. And as we decide and choose to forgive whatever we may not have forgiven from the fathers that we had, we have to remember that we may well want mercy ourselves sometime in our lives. So therefore, it reminds us that we would do well to show mercy to others. Remember, there's a passage from the Lord's Prayer that says we must forgive and be forgiven. That passage is found in Matthew 6, verse 12, and it says, "Forgive us as we forgive those who transgress against us." The very act of forgiveness heals us, because resentment makes us physically ill. Now, I understand forgiveness is not easy. Forgiveness is an ultimate act of our will. It's a choice we make. We have to choose to let go of our resentments. It's a spiritual choice. And we have to be conscious of doing it. When we speak the words, "I forgive you," it may take a while to really mean it, but the more we do it, the more we'll find the meaning in it. And the more we'll be able to declare that whatever issue we have between us and another is history. We can't change it. So if we decide we want to forgive, we can rehearse it, we can review it, we can renew it as many times as we need to. And each time that it comes to our mind, we must choose once again to release it to our higher power and let it go. I had to do that. I had to learn to make the choice to forgive my dad. My father would let his anger get away from him, and when he would punish, he did not know when to stop. His punishments were entirely too extreme. It was something I couldn't forgive for many, many years. It was always a resentment that I held, and it caused a barrier between us and our relationship. For me, it was not until after my dad died, and I had been through many years of counseling, that I was able to see things differently. I could see what a tender heart my father had, and in so many ways, he was a wonderful father. And I was able to see, both as a child, as an adult, and appreciate the good things that he taught me. He taught me things like I had to learn to be honest 100% of the time. It has served me well. He taught me to be an individual and a leader, not a follower. He taught me to love nature and the ocean and the absolute awe of a thunder and lightning storm. I also saw the flawed way in which he had been raised and what unreasonable feelings society had demanded of him as a male. I also saw the untethered anger that I had experienced was not the way I wanted to raise my son. So in that respect, my father also taught me how not to be. We have to look at our parents, because sometimes our parents are teaching us how not to be. A lot of the reason that I was finally able to really forgive my father was when I started looking for what was good in him and what was good in our relationship. And the more I looked for that, the more I found. I actually, after he died, found letters that he had written to us. When I was little, I didn't remember them, but when he would write to us, to my mom and to us, when he was traveling and working away from home. And those letters showed a love and a tenderness that he had within him for all of us that escaped me many times in my life. I began to see that underneath that tough exterior that he had developed through his erroneous upbringing, that there was a kind-hearted man who didn't know how to express his true feelings or how to carry out his parental duties, because you see, he was only doing what had been done to him. And what I learned was that didn't really represent his heart nor his spirit. So just as my dad was teaching me how not to be a parent to my child, King David was teaching his son Absalom how not to be. But Absalom could not see it and could not forgive him. And by not forgiving his dad, he destroyed his own life. That's really the lesson. Unforgiveness will destroy our lives. It never affects the other person. It affects us. So if you think that alienating yourself from your father or holding grudges or punishing him by not having a relationship with him would teach him a lesson, that's really not the way it works. In this lifetime, one wrong is never healed by another wrong. That is what the Bible story emphasizes in the destruction of the life of Absalom. You know, the stories in the Bible always had a moral, a lesson to always live by, and a major lesson all throughout the Bible and many, many, many of the stories is to forgive. Remember, one of the last 7 words on the cross was Jesus looking down at his executioners all around him and saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." On this day, I say, forgive our earthly father. Forgive yourself if you weren't a perfect father. Know that you were just conditioned by the society you were raised in and by the people who raised you. It was all you knew how to do. Your father may or may not have known what he was doing. Forgive him anyway. We can't know how to hurt others unless we have been hurt by someone ourselves. We only learn what we've been taught. So as you think of forgiving hurts, remember that the person who hurt you had learned that behavior from someone who hurt them. Knowing that will make it easier for you to forgive. Unity teaches us, just as the Bible teaches us, that we were made in the image and the likeness of our Creator. Jesus said, I and the Father are one. We were all born with the same positive characteristics that we associate with God. Things like love and joy and peace and truth. We were all born with those positive characteristics. So was your dad. So was my dad. And then something happened along the way with society. All people are born with the same loving characteristics. Whether they're displaying them or not, they're still created in us all. That's what we have to remember. So if you're one of those folks like I was, and you're having a hard time forgiving your dad for his imperfections like I was, whatever it was for you or your father, whether he was an absent dad or a harsh dad, or you have hurtful memories of some experiences that you may have had, remember, dad was most likely influenced by those who raised him and treated him the same way. So today is Father's Day. Forgiveness is in order. Give your dad a call, or you can even write a letter if your dad has passed on. Writing a letter is amazing. You can write a letter, and the energy that you put in that letter, you can burn that letter, and it transmutes that energy. It's amazing how cathartic that is. But know in your heart that no matter what it seemed like, your dad loved you. Even if he couldn't say the words, he loved you. Find a way today to tell him you love him. That may or may not mend the relationship in one call or one letter, but it will definitely make a difference. And it'll be a really good start. And if you have a wonderful relationship with your dad, I know you've probably already called him. And I know you're thinking of him with loving thoughts and gratitude this day. And if you're the father that you've regretted in any way, doing anything, forgive yourself. We do better when we know better. Don't live in the past. So let's take this now into a bit of meditation, a bit of reflection. Just allow yourself to move into that place of, you may want to lay things aside and be comfortable in your chair and take a few breaths. Just remember that the Bible reminds us in Romans 3, verse 23, we all have come short of the glory of God. Every one of us. We're not to look back, but to choose it to teach us to do better. We have to let go. We have to forgive. We have to remember that not one of us can cast the first stone. We've all come short of the glory of God. Whatever the hurt, whatever the shortcomings, this morning we make a choice just to let them go. Let them go. As we make a choice, we look for the best. Look for the good. Find the ways in which there was goodness, for there's always goodness. We choose to realize that however that person who raised us treated us, whether it was good or whether it was bad, it was simply what he was taught by those who raised him. And so we choose this day to bless our fathers, our stepfathers, our grandfathers, ourselves. We bless them. We find compassion in our heart for them. And we also know there are no accidents. We know our Father was the perfect Father for us. Perfect Father to teach us the lessons that we came here to learn. So we choose today to find the places where we can thank our fathers, where we can bless our fathers, where we can look for the good and let go of the old hurts, where we can remind ourselves that the only energy that heals is the energy of love. So today we make this Father's Day a day of love. We affirm today is a day of healing and loving. And we remember, as the scripture told us this morning in the daily word, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. Take those words into your heart, take them out into your day. Find a way to tell your Father that you love him. Find the good and forgive. And so it is.